everyone. If you're watching this video, then you are part of the TTOR Army, an army that is building itself up one subscriber at a time. As you can see from the title and thumbnail of today's video, today we're going to answer a very important question. Why are most people not getting married by 30? And by that I mean most people not getting married by the age of 30. But before we get into that, I'd like to bring a couple of things to your attention. One, if you haven't already, I would encourage you to go to those platforms over there. Follow me on Creation Social, which is my own Twitter alternative that I started and run. Follow me on Spotify, subscribe to me on BitChute, subscribe to me on Rumble, and follow me on X, formerly known as Twitter. Also, if you're a fan of my content that covers topics related to feminism and MGTOW, I would encourage you to check out my playlist called Feminism and MGTOW, and you can see that there's a number of videos you may find of interest, such as my video about the YouTuber Zara Dar, who dropped out of her PhD program to become an OnlyFans model. I got a video about Mark Driscoll claiming that people like me are losers. And we also got a video about why are men leaving the church. Ashley St. Clair going woke feminist despite Elon Musk. And then I got a video about how Western women hypocritically condemn older men for dating younger women. And I got a video asking why do older women and younger men date each other. And then there was my recent video, Are Men Who Play Video Games Losers? All of these videos you can find in my Feminism and MGTOW playlist, as well as today's video. The link to this playlist will be in the description box down below, and it will also be on my end screen at the end of the video. With that being said, let's go into the subject that prompted today's video, which you can see right here on the screen. It is a tweet by End Wokeness, who said, "Insane chart on the death of marriage." As you can see on the screen, the chart shows men and women and years. 1975, and then it goes every 10 years until you get to 2025. The women's column shows how many women in America were married by the age of 30, and the men's column shows how many men in America were married by the age of 30. So as we can see, in 1975, 91% of women got married prior to the age of 30. And in 1975, 81% of men prior to the age of 30 were getting married. Flash forward 50 years to 2025, only 25.6% of women are getting married prior to the age of 30. And for the men, it's even worse. Only 16.5% of men are getting married by the age of 30 in America. Let me put this another way so that you can fully understand just how dramatic of a difference this is between 1975 and 2025. In 1975, 91% of women were getting married by the time they reached the age of 30. In 2025, 74.4% of women are not married by the time they reach the age of 30. And for men, it's even worse. For men, it's 81% of them were getting married before they hit the age of 30 back in 1975. Flash forward 50 years later, and 83.5% of men are not getting married by the time they hit the age of 30. Now, if you are a person who is about to hit 30, or you just hit 30 and you're single still and you've never been married, and you're starting to wonder if you'll ever find someone or if you'll ever get married, or if you feel like you're some kind of freak because you're not married by the age of 30, you're still not married as a 30-year-old person, I want you to know that you are not a freak. It turns out you are actually normal. You represent the majority of American men and women. The vast majority of American men and women are not getting married before the age of 30. And of course, some people are having a field day with this. Coach Greg Adams said in response to this tweet, "I have been signaling the death of marriage for a decade, and I took bullets for all of you, LOL. Now that the numbers can't be denied, what's your solution?" And then Leo said in response, "Until marriage actually offers men something positive and tangible, expect this to keep trending towards zero. Women, courts, and government declared the war on marriage and men. Men are swiftly adapting." Now, when looking at this graph that we've been examining so far, it is perfectly logical and rational and natural to ask the question, why did this big change occur? How come women went from being 91% of them were married by the time they hit the age of 30 in 1975 to 74.4% of them are not married by the time they hit the age of 30 in 2025? Why did men go from being 81% of them getting married prior to the age of 30 in 1975 to 83.5% of them not being married prior to the age of 30? Why such a dramatic difference? Why did this dramatic change happen? Well, I did a little bit of digging on Twitter as I was analyzing the trends around this graph we're looking at, and I came across this excellent post by Z's Turning. In this tweet by Z's Turning, we are provided some very interesting graphs and studies that provide a lot of insight into why the marriage rates are so low. It provides valuable insight as to why 74.4% of women are not getting married prior to the age of 30 and why 83.5% of men are not getting married prior to the age of 30. And this chart comes from Gallup Poll Social Series data from 1999 to 2023, and it tracks the political ideology of American 18 to 29-year-olds by gender. And so what you see here is that the purple line represents women and the orange line represents men. And there's a zero line that is going through the graph. If you go above the zero, then you're going into the liberal ideology. If you go below the zero, then you're going into the conservative ideology. And so one thing you may notice looking at this graph is that around 2003, both men and women in the 18 to 29-year-old demographics were majority conservative in terms of their political ideology. Around 2003, the women were a -1, which made them slightly conservative when you looked at their net political ideology. And the men at the same time were about -9, -8. It's hard to tell, but they were firmly conservative. So while the women in 2003 in the 18 to 29-year-old demographic were not as conservative as the men in that same demographic, both the men and women in 2003 were conservative leaning in that 18 to 29-year-old demographic. Flash forward to about 2021, according to this chart, and you see that there is a dramatic difference. In about 2021, we see that men dropped from -8 to about -5. So men over the next 18 years became slightly less conservative on average than 20 years ago, well, than 2023, but they were still definitely on the conservative side of the political ideology in the 18 to 29-year-old demographic. But women from 2003 to 2021 went from being slightly conservative in the 18 to 29-year-old demographic, a -1, to being a +30, making them not just liberal, they made them super liberal, made them super leftist. And so from 2003 to 2021, men went from being very conservative to being slightly less conservative, and women went from being slightly conservative to being insanely liberal in the 18 to 29-year-old demographic from 2003 to 2021. And then, of course, as you can see from the chart, from 2021 on, the women went from being +30 liberal to being +23. So They went so insane, so far left, and so feminist that women are starting to wake up and realize, maybe this is not a good idea. So they're starting to taper off already. And men, well, their conservatism has dipped even more, but they're still slightly on the conservative side at the end of this chart. And I would say here in 2026, men are still, in general, slightly conservative in the 18 to 29-year-old demographic. Now, you may be thinking to yourself at this point, okay, but what's the value difference between being conservative and being liberal, being leftist? Well, we have this chart right here on the screen, which I sure hope you can see. OBS says you should be able to see it. And it is very interesting. So this is a list of ranking 13 different priorities, and they rank the priorities of females who voted for Kamala Harris in the 2024 election and males who voted for Kamala Harris in the 2024 election, the females who voted for Trump in the 2024 election, and the men who voted for Trump in the 2024 election. And you'll notice at the top of this that this is not just any men and women who voted for each candidate in 2024. This is among respondents in the age demographic of 18 to 29 years old. In other words, what are the values of the 18 to 29-year-old men and women who voted conservative versus voted leftist? You'll also notice at the top that these different 18 to 29-year-olds who voted differently are responding to the question, which of the following is important to your personal definition of success? And males who voted for Trump listed having children as their number one priority in terms of defining success. Males who listed voting for Trump listed having children as their number one priority when it came to being successful. They had achieving financial independence as number 2, having a job or career you find fulfilling as number 3, and being married as number 4. Now, let's look at the females who voted for Harris in the 18 to 29 demographic. There's a list of 13 priorities, and the females who voted for Harris list being married and having children as their bottom 3 priorities. They listed those 2 things above fame and influence, but everything else was listed above being married and having children when it came to females who voted for Harris defining success. They said, oh, well, you got to have a job or career you find fulfilling. You got to have enough money to do the things you want. You got to have emotional stability, and you got to use your talents and resources to help others. You have to achieve financial independence. You can't have debt. You have to own your own home. You have to make your family or community proud. You have to be spiritually grounded, and you need to be able to retire early. Those all take priority before marriage and kids, according to women in the 18 to 29 years old demographic who voted for Kamala Harris. It is almost exactly the opposite of the men who voted for Trump. Men who voted for Trump list having children as the number one definition of success, and they listed being married as their number 4 priority when it comes to defining success. Women who voted for Kamala Harris have it completely opposite. It's basically all about, having a good job and being financially independent and having your own place and having your own home and being able to retire early. It's all about money and materialism before it comes to family and kids. But when you look at the female voters who voted for Trump, you see something very odd. You would think that because both men and women in the 18 to 29-year-old demographic voted for Trump, you would think that those men and those women would view having children and being married as equally high priorities. And as you can see with the females who voted for Trump, they don't even have having children or being married in their top 5 priorities when it comes to defining success. Females who voted for Trump have achieving financial independence as their number 1 priority, having a job or career you find fulfilling as their number 2 priority, owning your own home as their number 3, being spiritually grounded as number 4, and having enough money to do the things you want to do. So literally, females who voted for Trump prioritize money and a good job and owning your own home over having children and being married. They have having children as number 6, and being married is all the way down at number 9. So the females who voted for Trump, while they have marriage and children as a slightly higher priority than females who voted for Harris, the fact of the matter is that getting married and having kids really isn't all that important to conservative women in the 18 to 29-year-old demographic who voted for Trump. Both female liberals and female conservatives have been heavily influenced by feminism, which tells them that being married and having children, if it isn't outright bad, it's just not that important, and it's more important to be financially independent and have your own home and have your own car, have your own insurance, and blah, 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 blah. It's all more important than having children and being married. So when you look at men who voted for Trump and how they have being married and having kids as some of their highest priorities in life, but then they look at the females who voted for Trump and the females who voted for Kamala Harris and see that both parties do not have getting married and having kids as a very high priority in their life, it fills those men with a lot of despair and depression, and they think, oh my gosh, I want to be married and have kids and raise a family just like my parents did with me and my siblings. But the women in my time, whether they be conservative or liberal, they don't even value having children or being married all that much. They'd rather do what guys do. What do I mean by that? Well, you see, if you look at these values, they actually seem to be the opposite of what you'd expect. Because you see, back 50 years ago and beyond, women used to prioritize having children and being married as among their highest priorities in life. And it was men being financially independent and having their own home and having a good job and being a good provider. That was their role and their highest priorities. Well, thanks to feminism over the last several decades, over the last 50 years, that has flipped. Men have now become the romantic group that prioritizes having children and being married above just about everything else when it comes to defining success. And it's women who are focusing on the job and the career and the money and the car and the insurance and anything and everything but getting married and having kids. Values that we typically and traditionally assigned to men in the past have now become women's values, and the values we typically assign to women in the past have now become men's values. Now, it's not to say that men never valued having children or being married, but in today's day and age, they value it even more than women do. So it seems like the values have been inverted from our perspective. And because we have such a dramatic difference in values between men who are conservative and women of both political aisles, it comes as no surprise then this tweet by Tate Brown, who in response to our original tweet we were looking at said, I don't want to hear any conservative mouth off about how men need to step up. And he shows a picture of an article that says girls are now less likely than boys to say they want to get married. And what you see on the graph from 1993 to 2023 is the percentage of 12th graders, so 17 to 18-year-olds, saying they are most likely to choose to get married in the long run. Back in 1993, 83% of girls and 76% of boys in 12th grade said they would most likely choose to get married in the long run. Flash forward to 2023, boys are at 74% among 12th graders saying that they would most likely choose to get married. But for girls who are in 12th grade, only 61% said they are most likely to choose to get married in the long run. So boys in 12th grade from 1993 to 2023 stayed roughly the same in terms of the percentage of them who say they are most likely to choose to get married in the long run. But girls saw a 22% drop in that answer over that 20-year span, and I'm sure today it's even lower than that for the girls. So because of all the feminism being indoctrinated into these boys and girls growing up, because of the dramatic difference in values that comes with having a liberal, leftist, feminist worldview versus having a Christian conservative worldview. What we see is that girls have become far more leftist and they are far less willing to get married in the long run than boys are now. Which is funny because, as you can see, in 1993, girls valued getting married and having children a lot higher than boys did, in 12th grade anyway. But now you flash forward to today, and it's the boys who are way more likely to want marriage and family and kids than girls do in the 12th grade level. It's crazy. Now, another man named Matt Von Swoll said, "If you want to know what's going on, then you need to seriously study this graph. Seriously, pause and look at this graph. This tells you what's happening." So we're going to full screen the graph, which you can see right here on the screen. So as you can see on the graph, it says that in 1975, 91% of women were getting married by the time they hit 30 years old, and about 12% of women were getting bachelor degrees in that 25 to 34 age bracket. But you flash forward to 2025, now only 24.4% of women are getting married by the time they hit 30 years old, and nearly 50% of women in the 25 to 34 age bracket are getting their bachelor's degrees around that time. So the percentage of women getting bachelor's degrees within the 25 to 34 age bracket over the last 50 years went from about 12% to nearly 50%. A lot of red pill MGTOW people would look at a graph like this and say that there's a strong correlation between women getting bachelor's degrees and women wanting to get married prior to the age of 30. Basically, their argument is that as women have become more educated and they've become masculinized and they've been encouraged to pursue money and a career over family, that is what is contributing to the falling off the cliff of the marriage rates by the time people are hitting 30 years old. Basically, the more educated women get and the more they become financially independent and the more that they pursue a career, the less likely they are by a country mile to want to get married and have kids. Now, some of you watching this video may make the point that the increasing acceptance of casual sex in society has been a major contributor to the decline of marriage rates. And on that note, I think you'll find this graph in particular to be very interesting. What you see here, according to Anti-Feminism Australia's Twitter account, is a new study shows the number of women each percentile of man is sleeping with. And as you can see, the majority of women are now sleeping with the top 1% of men. And so on the graph, you see mean number of female sexual partners since age 18 by male percentile bin. So the top 1%, 287. The top 5 to 2%, 85. The top 90 to 94th percentile, 38. The 80 to 89th, 21. And then once you go below the 80th percentile, you only see 8. And then you see the graph and the pie chart showing the share of all reported female sexual partnerships accounted for by each percentile bin. This information is provided by the General Social Survey of 2014 through 2024. And basically what this shows is that the vast majority of women, basically the super vast majority of women, are only sleeping with the top 20% of men in terms of who they choose to have sex with, whether that be casual sex that goes nowhere or casual sex that leads to more or leads to marriage. Basically, the majority of women, the vast majority of women, are shacking up with the top 20% of men, especially the top 5% of men, and super especially the top 1% of men. That is now confirmed by a study. And when you factor all of that in, when you look at the differing values between leftists and conservatives, and you look at how women, even on the conservative side, don't view marriage and having children as anywhere near as high of a priority as men do in the conservative movement. And when you look at how women have dramatically risen in terms of getting bachelor's degrees, and you look at how women apparently, as confirmed by a study, apparently prefer to sleep with the top 5, top 1% of men in terms of choosing sexual partners, which usually leads to them choosing partners for dating or marriage. When you look at all of that, big ball of wax all rolled together, is it any wonder that 74.4% of women are not getting married by the time they hit the age of 30 in America? Is it any wonder that 83.5% of men are not getting married by the age of 30 here in America? When you look at all that ball of wax, the differing values that comes with political ideology, and you look at who women are choosing to sleep with, well, it's no wonder. As a matter of fact, you could make the argument that based on what we saw with the data, it's kind of a miracle that any men are getting married at all by the age of 30. The fact that 16.5% of men are getting married by the age of 30 seems to be too high considering all of the factors that we were looking at. Now at this point you may be thinking that I've been rambling on, and you're probably wondering to yourself, Justin, what's the point? I mean, it's great data that you've shown us. It's all bizarre, eye-opening stuff. But what's the answer to the question of why people are choosing not to get married by the age of 30? Well, for men, it's hard to find any women who share their values in terms of family and children and whatnot, and who actually love them for who they are. And so most of the time, men just can't find a good woman. I see that all the time on the internet, is a lot of guys are like, I just can't find a good woman for me, and so I'm just not going to look for anyone at all. Plus, when you look at society and how basically men are not considered economically attractive enough for marriage until they have their own place and their own car and their own insurance and a good enough paying job to finance all of those things at the same time, and you consider the fact that most men can't get to that point until their early to mid 30s, sometimes closer to 40, well, that's also a huge contributing factor as to why the vast majority of men are not getting married by the age of 30. And because women have been socially conditioned in modern times to not pursue a man for dating or marriage until he becomes economically attractive enough, that's why 74.4% of women are not getting married by the time they hit the age of 30. It's because the guys that they want for marriage don't become those guys, generally speaking, until their 30s, sometimes closer to 40. And so a lot of women end up dating older men. And as we saw from one of my recent videos, a lot of older women end up pursuing younger men because men of their own age either aren't interested in them or they aren't interested in men of their own age, and so they go younger. And with that, I hope that answers your question. Thank you for watching the video up until this point, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.